Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be reading and discussing passages from the Kazuaki Tanahashi translation of the Shōbōgenzō by Zen Master Dōgen. Dogen was born in Kyoto in 1200 as an illegitimate son of Minamoto Michihika. The Minamoto clan was the most important samurai family in Japan in the 12th and 13th centuries, so Dogen enjoyed a very affluent childhood. But when he was around 13, he renounced and became a Tendai Buddhist monk. However, he eventually left Tendai to become an independent monk and undertook a trip to China, where he encountered Caodong Buddhism, the Chinese predecessor to Soto Zen Buddhism. In a biography of his life written after the fact, the thing that motivated him to continue to study and eventually leave Tendai was the following question, quote, "As I study both the exoteric and the esoteric schools of Buddhism, they maintain that human beings are endowed with Dharma nature by birth. If this is the case, why did the Buddhas of all ages, undoubtedly in possession of enlightenment, find it necessary to seek enlightenment and engage in spiritual practice?" Unquote. After finding the answer to his question, he returned to Japan and founded the Soto Zen school of Buddhism in the 1230s. Between 1231 and Dogen's death in 1253, he wrote the components, known as fascicles, of what would be called his Shōbōgenzō, the title of which translates to the Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. After his death, it was compiled into versions with 12, 28, 60, 75, and 95 fascicles. The difference comes from how this text is to be understood and used. Some people understand it as writings on a particular and specific theme, and others understand it as being a zenshu, a complete compilation of everything somebody has ever written. Regardless, the passages we will be reading today are the Genjo Koan, Uji, and Shinjin Gakudo. These titles translate to Actualizing the Fundamental Point, Being Time, and Body and Mind Study of the Way, respectively. We hope you enjoy. Genjo Koan, Actualizing the Fundamental Point. As all things are Buddha Dharma, there is delusion and realization, practice, and birth and death, and there are Buddhas and sentient beings. As the myriad things are without an abiding self, there is no delusion, no realization, no Buddha, no sentient being, and no birth and death. The Buddha way is, basically, leaping clear of the many and the one. Thus there are birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings, and Buddhas. Yet in attachment, blossoms fall, and in aversion, weeds spread. To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. Further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization, who are in delusion throughout delusion. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas, who go on actualizing Buddhas. When you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you grasp things directly. Unlike things and their reflections in the mirror, and unlike the moon and its reflection in the water, when one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. When you first seek Dharma, you imagine you are far away from its environs, but Dharma is already correctly transmitted. You are immediately your original self. When you ride in a boat and watch the shore, you might assume that the shore is moving. When you keep your eyes closely on the boat, you can see that the boat moves. Similarly, if you imagine myriad things with a confused body and mind, you might suppose that your mind and nature are permanent. When you practice intimately and return to where you are, it will be clear that nothing at all has unchanging self. Firewood becomes ash, and it does not become firewood again. Yet do not suppose that the ash is future and the firewood past. You should understand that firewood abides in the phenomenal expression of firewood, which fully includes past and future, and is independent of past and future. Ash abides in the phenomenal expression of ash, which fully includes future and past. Just as firewood does not become firewood again after it is ash, you do not return to birth after death. This being so, it is an established way in Buddha Dharma to deny that birth turns into death. Accordingly, birth is understood as no birth. It is an unshakable teaching in Buddha's discourse that death does not turn into birth. Accordingly, death is understood as no death. Birth is an expression, complete this moment. Death is an expression, complete this moment. They are like winter and spring. You do not call winter the beginning of spring, nor summer the end of spring. Enlightenment is like the moon reflected on the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in dewdrops on the grass, or even in one drop of water. Enlightenment does not divide you, just as the moon does not break the water. You cannot hinder enlightenment, just as a drop of water does not hinder the moon in the sky. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon. Each reflection, however long or short its duration, manifests the vastness of the dewdrop and realizes the limitlessness of the moonlight in the sky. When Dharma does not fill your whole body and mind, you think it is already sufficient. When Dharma fills your body and mind, you understand that something is missing. For example, when you sail out in a boat to the middle of an ocean where no land is in sight and view the four directions, the ocean looks circular, and it does not look any other way. But the ocean is neither round nor square. Its features are infinite in variety. It is like a palace. It is like a jewel. It only looks circular as far as you can see at that time. All things are like this. Though there are many features in the dusty world and the world beyond conditions, you see and understand only what your eye of practice can reach. In order to learn the nature of the myriad things, you must know that although they may look round or square, the other features of oceans and mountains are infinite in variety. Whole worlds are there. It is so, not only around you, but also directly beneath your feet, or in a drop of water. A fish swims in the ocean, and no matter how far it swims, there is no end to the water. A bird flies in the sky, and no matter how far it flies, there is no end to the air. However, the fish and the bird have never left their elements. When their activity is large, their field is large. When their need is small, their field is small. Thus, each of them totally covers its full range, and each of them totally experiences its realm. If the bird leaves the air, it will die at once. If the fish leaves the water, it will die at once. Know that water is life and air is life. The bird is life and the fish is life. Life must be the bird and life must be the fish. It is possible to illustrate this with more analogies. Practice, enlightenment, and people are like this. Now, if a bird or a fish tries to reach the end of its element before moving in it, this bird or this fish will not find its way or its place. When you find your place where you are, practice occurs, actualizing the fundamental point. When you find your way at this moment, practice occurs, actualizing the fundamental point. For the place, the way, is neither large nor small, neither yours nor others. The place, the way, has not carried over from the past, and it is not merely arising now. Accordingly, in the practice enlightenment of the Buddha way, meeting one thing is mastering it. Doing one practice is practicing completely. Here is the place. Here the way unfolds. The boundary of realization is not distinct, for the realization comes forth simultaneously with the mastery of Buddha Dharma. Do not suppose that what you realize becomes your knowledge and is grasped by your consciousness. Although actualized immediately, the inconceivable may not be apparent. Its appearance is beyond your knowledge. Zen Master Baocha of Mount Mayu was fanning himself. A monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of wind is permanent, and there is no place it does not reach. Why then do you fan yourself?" "Although you understand that the nature of wind is permanent," Baocha replied, "you do not understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere." "What is the meaning of its reaching everywhere?" asked the monk again. The master just kept fanning himself. The monk bowed deeply. The actualization of the Buddha Dharma, the vital path of its correct transmission, is like this. If you say that you do not need to fan yourself because the nature of wind is permanent and you can have wind without fanning, you will understand neither permanence nor the nature of wind. The nature of wind is permanent. Because of that, the wind of the Buddha's house brings forth the gold of the earth and makes fragrant the cream of the long river. Written in mid-autumn, the first year of Tenpuku, 1233, and given to my lay student Koshuyo of Kyushu Island. Revised in the fourth year of Kencho, 1252. Uji, the time being. An ancient Buddha said, "For the time being, stand on top of the highest peak. For the time being, proceed along the bottom of the deepest ocean. For the time being, 3 heads and 8 arms. For the time being, an 8 or 16-foot body. For the time being, a staff or whisk. For the time being, a pillar or lantern. For the time being, the sons of Jiang and Li. For the time being, the earth and sky." For the time being here means time itself is being, and all being is time. A golden 16-foot body is time. Because it is time, there is the radiant illumination of time. Study it as the 12 hours of the present. 3 heads and 8 arms is time. Because it is time, it is not separate from the 12 hours of the present. Even though you do not measure the hours of the day as long or short, far or near, you still call it 12 hours. Because the signs of time's coming and going are obvious, people do not doubt it. Although they do not doubt it, they do not understand it. Or when sentient beings doubt what they do not understand, their doubt is not firmly fixed. Because of that, their past doubts do not necessarily coincide with the present doubt. Yet, doubt itself is nothing but time. The way the self arrays itself is the form of the entire world. See each thing in this entire world as a moment of time. Things do not hinder one another, just as moments do not hinder one another. The way-seeking mind arises in this moment. A way-seeking moment arises in this mind. It is the same with practice and with attaining the way. Thus the self-setting self out in array sees itself. This is the understanding that self is time. Know that in this way there are myriads of forms and hundreds of grasses throughout the entire earth, and yet each grass and each form itself is the entire earth. The study of this is the beginning of practice. When you are at this place, there is just one grass, there is just one form. There is understanding of form and no understanding of form. There is understanding of grass and no understanding of grass. There is nothing but just this moment. The time being is all the time there is. Grass being, form being are both time. Each moment is all being, is the entire world. Reflect now whether any being or any world is left out of the present moment. Yet, an ordinary person who does not understand Buddha Dharma may hear the words, the time being, this way. For a while I was 3 heads and 8 arms. For a while I was an 8 or 16-foot body. This is like having crossed over rivers and climbed mountains. Even though the mountains and rivers still exist, I have already passed them and now reside in the Jeweled Palace and Vermilion Tower. Those mountains and rivers are as distant from me as heaven is from earth. It is not that simple. At the time the mountains were climbed and the rivers crossed, you were present. Time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away. As time is not marked by coming and going, the moment you climb the mountains is the time being right now. If time keeps coming and going, you are the time being right now. This is the meaning of the time being. Does this time being not swallow up the moment when you climbed the mountains and the moment when you resided in the Jeweled Palace and Vermilion Tower? Does it not spit them out? 3 heads and 8 arms may be yesterday's time. The 8 or 16-foot body may be today's time. Yet yesterday and today are both in the moment when you directly enter the mountains and see thousands and myriads of peaks. Yesterday's time and today's time do not go away. 3 heads and 8 arms move forward as your time being. It looks as if they are far away, but they are here and now. The 8 or 16-foot body moves forward as your time being. It looks as if it's nearby, but it is exactly here. Thus, a pine tree is time, bamboo is time. Do not think that time merely flies away. Do not see flying away as the only function of time. If time merely flies away, you would be separated from time. The reason you do not clearly understand the time being is that you think of time only as passing. In essence, all things in the entire world are linked with one another as moments. Because all moments are the time being, they are your time being. The time being has the quality of flowing. So-called today flows onto tomorrow. Today flows into yesterday. Yesterday flows into today. And today flows into today. Tomorrow flows into tomorrow. Because flowing is a quality of time, moments of past and present do not overlap or line up side by side. Qingyuan is time. Huangbo is time. Jiangxi is time. Shito is time. Because self and other are already time. Practice enlightenment is time. Being splattered with mud and getting wet with water is also time. Although the views of an ordinary person and the causes and conditions of those views are what the ordinary person sees, they are not necessarily the ordinary person's truth. The truth merely manifests itself for the time being as an ordinary person. Because you think your time or your being is not truth, you believe that the 16-foot golden body is not you. However, your attempts to escape from being the 16-foot golden body are nothing but bits and pieces of the time being. Those who have not yet confirmed this should look into it deeply. The hours of horse and sheep, which are arrayed in the world now, are actualized by ascendings and descendings of the time being at each moment. The rat is time, the tiger is time, sentient beings are time, Buddhas are time. At this time, you enlighten the entire world with 3 heads and 8 arms. You enlighten the entire world with the 16-foot golden body. To fully actualize the entire world with the entire world is called a thorough practice. To fully actualize the golden body, to arouse the way-seeking mind, practice, attain enlightenment, and enter nirvana, is nothing but being, is nothing but time. Just actualize all time as all being. There is nothing extra. A so-called extra being is thoroughly an extra being. Thus, the time being half actualized is half of the time being completely actualized, and a moment that seems to be missed is also completely being. In the same way, even the moment before or after the moment that appears to be missed is also complete in itself, the time being. Vigorously abiding in each moment is the time being. Do not mistakenly confuse it as non-being. Do not forcefully assert it as being. You may suppose that time is only passing away and not understand that time never arrives. Although understanding itself is time, understanding does not depend on its own arrival. People only see times coming and going and do not thoroughly understand that the time being abides in each moment. This being so, when can they penetrate the barrier? Even if people recognize the time being in each moment, who could give expression to this recognition? Even if they could give expression to this recognition for a long time, who could stop looking for the realization of the original face? According to ordinary people's view of the time being, even enlightenment and nirvana as the time being would be merely aspects of coming and going. The time being is entirely actualized without being caught up in nets or cages. Deva kings and heavenly beings appearing right and left are the time being of your complete efforts right now. The time being of all beings throughout the world in water and on land is just the actualization of your complete effort right now. All beings of all kinds in the visible and invisible realms are the time being actualized by your complete effort, flowing due to your complete effort. Closely examine this flowing. Without your complete effort right now, nothing would be actualized, nothing would flow. Do not think flowing is like wind and rain moving from east to west. The entire world is not unchangeable, is not unmovable, it flows. Flowing is like spring. Spring with all its numerous aspects is called flowing. When spring flows, there is nothing outside of spring. Study this in detail. Spring invariably flows through spring. Although flowing itself is not spring, flowing occurs throughout spring. Thus, flowing is completed at just this moment of spring. Examine this thoroughly, coming and going. In your study of flowing, if you imagine the objective to be outside yourself, and that you flow and move through hundreds and thousands of worlds for hundreds, thousands, and myriads of eons, you have not devotedly studied the Buddha way. Grand Master Hong Dao of Mount Yao, instructed by Shito, Great Master Wu Ji, once went to study with Zen Master Da Ji of Jiangxi. Yao Shan asked, "I'm familiar with the teaching of the 3 vehicles and 12 divisions, but what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?" Zen Master Da Ji replied, "For the time being, have him raise his eyebrows and wink." For the time being, do not have him raise his eyebrows and wink. For the time being, to have him raise his eyebrows and wink is right. For the time being, to have him raise his eyebrows and wink is not right. Hearing these words, Yao Shan experienced great enlightenment and said to Daji, "When I was studying with Shito, it was like a mosquito trying to bite an iron bowl." What Daji said is not the same as other people's words. The eyebrows and eyes are mountains and oceans, because mountains and oceans are eyebrows and eyes. To have him raise his eyebrows is to see the mountains. To have him wink is to understand the oceans. The right answer belongs to him, and he is activated by your having him raise the eyebrows and wink. Not right does not mean not having him raise his eyebrows and wink. Not to have him raise the eyebrows and wink does not mean not right. These are all equally the time being. Mountains are time. Oceans are time. If they were not time, there would be no mountains or oceans. Do not think that mountains and oceans here and now are not time. If time is annihilated, mountains and oceans are annihilated. As time is not annihilated, mountains and oceans are not annihilated. This being so, the morning star appears, the Tathagata appears, the eye appears, and raising a flower appears. Each is time. If it were not time, it could not be thus. Zen Master Guixing of Shi Prefecture is the heir of Shou Shan, a Dharma descendant of Linji. One day he taught the assembly. For the time being, mind arrives, but words do not. For the time being, words arrive, but mind does not. For the time being, both mind and words arrive. For the time being, neither mind nor words arrive. Both mind and words are the time being. Both arriving and not arriving are the time being. When the moment of arriving has not appeared, the moment of not arriving is here. Mind is a donkey, words are a horse. Having already arrived is words, and not having left is mind. Arriving is not coming, not arriving is not yet. The time being is like this. Arriving is overwhelmed by arriving, but not by not arriving. Not arriving is overwhelmed by not arriving, but not by arriving. Mind overwhelms mind and sees mind. Words overwhelm words and see words. Overwhelming overwhelms overwhelming and sees overwhelming. Overwhelming is nothing but overwhelming. This is time. As overwhelming is caused by you, there is no overwhelming that is separate from you. Thus you go out and meet someone. Someone meets someone. You meet yourself. Going out means going out. If these are not the actualization of time, they cannot be thus. Mind is the moment of actualizing the fundamental point. Words are the moment of going beyond, unlocking the barrier. Arriving is the moment of casting off the body. Not arriving is the moment of being one with just this, while being free from just this. In this way, you must endeavor to actualize the time being. The old masters have thus uttered these words, but is there nothing further to say? Mind and words arriving part way are the time being. Mind and words not arriving part way are the time being. In this manner you should examine the time being. To have him raise the eyebrows and wink is half the time being. To have him raise the eyebrows and wink is the time being missed. Not to have him raise the eyebrows and wink is half the time being. Not to have him raise the eyebrows and wink is the time being missed. Thus to study thoroughly coming and going, and to study thoroughly arriving and not arriving, is the time being of this moment. On the first day of winter, first year of Ninji, 1240, this was written at Kosho Holding Monastery. Shinjin Gakudo. Body and mind study of the way. The Buddha way cannot be attained unless you practice, and without study it remains remote. Zen Master Da Hui of Nanyue said, "It is not that there is no practice and no realization, it is just that they cannot be defiled." Not to study the Buddha way is to fall into the realm of shameless and erroneous ways. All preceding and succeeding Buddhas always practice the Buddha way. For the time being, let us say that there are two approaches to studying the Buddha way: to study with mind and to study with body. To study with mind means to study the various aspects of mind, such as consciousness, emotion, and intellect. After resonating with the way and arousing the thought of enlightenment, take refuge in the great way of the Buddha ancestors and devote yourself to the practice of way-seeking mind. Even if you have not yet aroused way-seeking mind, follow the examples of the Buddha ancestors who did arouse way-seeking mind in former times. There is the thought of enlightenment, bits and pieces of straightforward mind, the mind of the ancient Buddhas, everyday mind, the triple world which is one mind. Sometimes you study the way by casting off the mind. Sometimes you study the way by taking up the mind. Either way, study the way with thinking and study the way not thinking. To correctly transmit and inherit the brocade robe, to say, "You have attained my marrow," to make 3 bows and return to the original place, and to pound rice and receive the robe, this is studying mind with mind. Shaving the head and wearing the robe is itself turning the mind and illuminating the mind. Leaving the castle and entering the mountains is leaving one mind and entering one mind. To directly enter the mountains is to think not thinking. To leave the world behind is non-thinking. Those who have rolled up this matter into wide-open eyeballs are 2 or 3 bushels. Those who have tampered with it by karma consciousness are thousands and millions of pieces. When you study the way in this manner, having merit, the result comes of itself. Having the result, merit does not arrive. You will secretly borrow the nostrils of the Buddha ancestors and have them exhale, and taking up the hoof of a donkey, you will have it imprint the seal of enlightenment. These are authentic examples of the ancient tradition. Now, mountains, rivers, earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars are mind. At just this moment, what is it that appears directly in front of you? When we say mountains, rivers, and earth, we do not merely mean the mountains, rivers, and earth where you are standing. There are various kinds of mountains, such as Great Sumeru and Small Sumeru. Some mountains extend widely, some rise up steeply. 1 billion worlds and innumerable lands can be found in a mountain. There are mountains suspended in form. There are mountains suspended in emptiness. There are also many kinds of waters, heavenly rivers, earthly rivers, the 4 great rivers. There are lakes without heat. In the great northern continent, the heatless lake Anavatapta is the source of the 4 great rivers. There are oceans and there are pools. Earth is not necessarily ground, and ground is not necessarily earth. There is earth ground, there is mind ground, there is treasure ground. Although the varieties are innumerable, it is not that there is no earth, but invariably there is a world where emptiness is earth. The sun, moon, and stars, as seen by humans and by devas, are not the same, and the views of various beings differ widely. Views about one mind differ as well. Yet these views are nothing but mind. Is it inside or outside? Does it come or go? Is there more of it at birth or not? Is there less of it at death or not? How do we understand this birth and death, and views of birth and death? All of this is merely a moment or two of mind. A moment or two of mind is a moment of mountains, rivers, and earth, or 2 moments of mountains, rivers, and earth. Because mountains, rivers, earth, and so forth neither exist nor do not exist, they are not large or small, not attainable or unattainable, not knowable or unknowable, not penetrable or impenetrable. They neither change with realization nor change without realization. Just wholeheartedly accept and trust that to study the way with mind is this mountains, rivers, and earth mind itself thoroughly engaged in studying the way. This trust and acceptance is neither large nor small, neither existent nor non-existent. To study in this manner, understanding that home is no home, abandoning home and entering the homeless life, this is not measurable as large or small, near or far. It is beyond beginning or end, beyond ascending or descending. Broaching the subject, it is 7 or 8 feet. Responding immediately, it benefits the self and others. All this is nothing but the study of the way. Because the study of the way is like this, walls, tiles, and pebbles are mind. Other than this, there is no triple world mind only, and no phenomenal universe mind only. Mind is walls, tiles, and pebbles put together before the Xiantong era, and taken apart after the Xiantong era, splattered with mud and soaking wet. Binding the self with no rope, mind has the power to attract a pearl, and the ability to be a pearl in water. Some days the pearl is melted, sometimes it is crushed. There are times when this pearl is reduced to extremely fine powder. Mind does not converse with the bare pillars or rub shoulders with hanging lanterns. In this manner the mind studies the way running barefoot. Who can get a glimpse of it? The mind studies the way turning somersaults. All things tumble over with it. At this time a wall crumbling away allows you to study the 10 directions, and the gateless gate allows you to study the 4 quarters. The thought of enlightenment can occur within birth and death, within nirvana. It can also occur without concern for birth and death and nirvana. It does not depend upon the place where it occurs, nor is it hindered by the place where it occurs. Conditions do not arouse it, and knowledge does not arouse it. The thought of enlightenment arouses itself. This arousing is the thought of enlightenment. The thought of enlightenment is neither existent nor non-existent, neither good nor bad nor neutral. It is not the result of past suffering. Even beings in the blissful realm can arouse it. The thought of enlightenment arises just at the time of arising. It is not limited by conditions. Just now the thought of enlightenment is aroused. The entire universe arouses the thought of enlightenment. Although the thought of enlightenment seems to create conditions, it actually does not encounter conditions. The thought of enlightenment and conditions together hold out a single hand held out freely, a single hand held out in the midst of all being. Thus the thought of enlightenment is aroused even in the realm of hell, hungry ghosts, animals, and malevolent spirits. Bits and pieces of straightforward mind means all the bits and pieces moment after moment are straightforward mind. Not only 1 or 2 pieces, but all bits and pieces. The lotus leaf is perfectly round, round as a mirror. The tip of the water chestnut is extremely sharp, sharp as a gimlet. Although straightforward mind resembles a mirror, it is bits and pieces. Though it resembles a gimlet, it is bits and pieces. As for the mind of the ancient Buddhas, a monk once asked national teacher Dōgen, "What is the mind of the ancient Buddhas?" The master said, "Walls, tiles, and pebbles." This being so, you should know that the mind of the ancient Buddhas is not walls, tiles, and pebbles, and that walls, tiles, and pebbles are not called the mind of the ancient Buddhas. The mind of the ancient Buddhas is studied in this way. Everyday mind means to attain an everyday mind in this world or in any world. Yesterday goes forth from this moment, and today comes forth from this place. With going, the boundless sky goes. With coming, the entire earth comes. This is everyday mind. Everyday mind opens the gate of the inner chamber. Because thousands of gates and myriads of doors open and close all at once, it is everyday mind. Now, this boundless sky and entire earth are like unrecognized words, a voice from the deep. Words are all-inclusive. Mind is all-inclusive. Things are all-inclusive. Although there is birth and death in each moment of this life, of birth and death, the body after the final body is never known. Even though you do not know it, if you arouse the thought of enlightenment, you will move forward on the way of enlightenment. The moment is already here. Do not doubt it in the least. Even if you should doubt it, this is nothing but everyday mind. To study the way with the body means to study the way with your own body. It is the study of the way using this lump of red flesh. The body comes forth from the study of the way. Everything which comes forth from the study of the way is the true human body. The entire world of the 10 directions is nothing but the true human body. The coming and going of birth and death is the true human body. To turn this body around, abandoning the 10 unwholesome actions, keeping the 8 precepts, taking refuge in the 3 treasures, and leaving home and entering the homeless life, is the true study of the way. For this reason it is called the true human body. Those who follow this must not be like outsiders who hold the view of spontaneous enlightenment. Zen Master Dazhi of Baizhang said, "If you attach to the view that original purity and original emancipation are Buddha or Zen practice, you are a follower of the outsider's way of spontaneous enlightenment." This teaching is not the broken furniture of an abandoned house, but the collected efforts and accumulated virtue of studying the way. The body leaps up, transparently clear in 8 directions. It drops away, entwined around a tree like wisteria. Baizhang's words are nothing but manifesting this body, awakening beings, and expounding the Dharma. Manifesting another's body, awakening beings and expounding the Dharma. Not manifesting this body, awakening beings and expounding the Dharma. Not manifesting another's body, awakening beings and expounding the Dharma. Then again, his words are not expounding the Dharma. Thus, at the moment of dropping away of the body, there is a voice that stops all sound, At the moment of renouncing worldly life, the arm is cut off and the marrow is attained. Even if you begin to study the way before the eon of the King of Emptiness, still your practice as a descendant of yourself is endless. The entire world of 10 directions means the 10 directions are the entire world. East, west, south, north, the 4 midpoints, up and down are the 10 directions. Consider the moment when front and back, vertical and horizontal, are thoroughly mastered. To consider means to understand and to resolve that this human body, undivided by self and others, is the entire world of the 10 directions. This is to hear what has never been heard, because directions are all-inclusive, and all worlds are alike. The human body means the 4 great elements, and the 5 skandhas. However, none of these elements and skandhas is fully understood by ordinary people. Only sages thoroughly master them. Now penetrate the 10 directions with 1 particle of dust, but do not confine them to 1 particle of dust. Construct a monk's hall and a Buddha hall within a single particle of dust, and construct the entire world in the monk's hall and the Buddha hall. In this way the human body is constructed, and such construction comes from the human body. This is the meaning of the entire world of the 10 directions is the true human body. Do not follow the mistaken views of spontaneous or natural enlightenment. Because it is not in the realm of the measurable, the true human body is not broad or narrow. The entire world of the 10 directions is 84,000 Dharma expounding skandhas, 84,000 samadhis, and 84,000 dharanis. Because the 84,000 Dharma expounding skandhas are turning the Dharma wheel, the moment the Dharma wheel is turned, the true human body covers the whole universe and extends throughout all time. It is not that the true human body is unlimited. The true human body is just the true human body. At this moment it is you. At this moment it is I, who is the true human body, the entire world of the 10 directions. Without missing these points, we must study the way. Even if you were to renounce the body or accept the body for 3 great eons, for 13 great eons, or for innumerable eons, invariably, this is the moment to study the way backwards and forwards. To bow to the floor and to bow standing is dignified bearing, in motion and stillness. Painting a decayed tree and polishing a brick of dead ash continues without stopping. Even though calendar days are short and urgent, study of the way in this manner is profound and deep. Although the life of those who have abandoned home and entered the homeless realm may appear bleak and lonely, it should not be confused with that of woodcutters. Even if they are continually active, their life is not the same as that of farmers. Do not get caught up in discussions of delusion or enlightenment, good or bad. Do not stay in the realm of wrong or right, true or false. Coming and going of birth and death is the true human body, means that even though birth and death is where ordinary people drift about, it is where great sages are liberated. Merely going beyond the ordinary and surpassing the sage is not the true human body. Although there are 2 or 7 kinds of birth and death, when they are thoroughly mastered, they are not to be feared, as each one of them is nothing but birth and death. How is this so? Not abandoning birth, you see death. Not abandoning death, you see birth. Birth does not hinder death. Death does not hinder birth. Neither birth nor death is known by ordinary people. Birth is like a cypress tree. Death is like an iron man. Even if a cypress tree were to hinder a cypress tree, birth is never hindered by death. Accordingly, birth and death are the study of the way. Birth is not like the 1 sheet of cloth. Death is not like 2 rolls of cloth. Death is not the opposite of birth. Birth is not the opposite of death. Zen master Yuan Wu said, "Birth is undivided activity. Death is undivided activity. Filling up the great empty sky, straightforward mind is always bits and pieces." You should quietly pursue and examine these words. Although Zen master Yuan Wu once said this, he did not understand that birth and death further overflows undivided activity. When you study coming and going, in coming there is birth and death. In going there is birth and death. In birth there is coming and going. In death there is coming and going. Coming and going is to fly in and fly out with the entire world of the 10 directions as 2 or 3 wings, and to walk forward and backward with the entire world of the 10 directions as 3 or 5 feet. With birth and death as its head and tail, the entire world of the 10 directions, the true human body, freely turns the body and flaps the brain. When turning the body and flapping the brain, it is the size of a penny. It is inside a particle of dust. It is the vast flat earth. It is a sheer 8,000-foot cliff. Where there is a sheer 8,000-foot cliff, there is the vast flat earth. In this way, the true human body is manifested as the southern and northern continents. To examine this is the study of the way. The true human body is the bones and marrow of the realm beyond consciousness and unconsciousness. Just raising this up is the study of the way. On the 9th day, 9th month, 3rd year of Ninji, 1242, this was taught to the assembly at Horin Monastery. So that was passages from Dogen's Shōbōgenzō. We read Actualizing the Fundamental Point, Being Time, and Body and Mind Study of the Way. Docs, what did you think?
This one left me confused and fatigued. This was a reading that required a lot of mental energy to keep up with. It was just really tiring. I felt like I had done the mental equivalent of a hard exercise when I was done with this. I was also left pretty confused. So, yeah, this one didn't land very well with me.
Understandable. Yeah, this is a tough one. And it is one of the toughest texts that you could possibly attempt to translate. And so good on the translators and the compilers for attacking this and putting it into English for us, because this one is uniquely difficult. And with so many versions, like, there were like 5 or 6 that I mentioned in the intro, and some of them only being in kana, which only denote sound and not necessarily meaning. It can go a million different ways. And so it's a very hard text, and it's layered and layered with double meanings and with literary allusions and with allusions to other important texts and treatises in Zen. And so it's a very dense piece of work. And there's some very poignant parts in it, some very poignant phrases and some sentences that are really impactful. But overall, the text as a whole can be very difficult to work through. Dogen is notoriously playing with our perceptions and with our sort of opinions or expectations regarding structure and language and meaning and polysemy or layers of meaning. And all in the midst of it, he's trying to teach us very complicated Zen doctrines and trying to explain to us the way things are or the way the world works. So it's really a huge lift to read this. And people who really are into this can end up sort of coming back to it over and over and over and over again throughout their lives, reading it hundreds or thousands of times, trying to sort of unpack what's going on. And so for those listening, the amount of time and discussion that we're spending on this is going to be like a fraction of what's possible, just simply because we couldn't spend 100 years talking about this text. We couldn't spend, all of our time getting to every point there is. We just have to hit the highlights because there's so much going on here.
Yeah. I was left unsure what Dogen was trying to accomplish at several pieces. I can think of a few possible scenarios and reasons this happened. So it could be that I do not have the cultural context necessary to make heads or tails of what's going on here. There's a whole lot of phrases that are probably meaningful in a way that I, as a Westerner in the 2020s, just don't have access to. It's also possible that some of the meaning got mangled in the translation. As you just said, this is a difficult thing to translate. I suspect there are aspects of it that just don't translate to English well. Just there's no equivalent way to say what they're trying to say in the language that we're speaking right now. So, again, props to the translators. They definitely had their work cut out for them, but also there is always going to be something lost in translation when you're using something this dense. I think it's also possible that Dogen is using self-negating and contradictory language and ideas in an effort to either disorient the reader, which, congratulations, you did it, or to try to impress us with his wisdom and wordplay, and that mission did not succeed for me, at least. And Right. We've talked in the past about how there are situations where Buddhism wants you disoriented, wants to shock you, wants you to run in circles if you try to approach things rationally. And it's also possible that these texts are just not intended to be examined rationally. And if that's the case, I am not the right target audience. And it could be all four of the things that I just mentioned at once as well. So I understand the underlying principles he's gesturing towards. There's a lot of middle way, there's a lot of non-duality, emptiness, etc. in this subtext, but I don't really understand Dogen's additions and reframings of most of these principles. I do get a few things, and we're going to talk about those when we get into the specific readings, and I can comprehend the individual words well enough, but overall, a lot of this, I don't understand the structure he's trying to build. There's no shape to these stories, and that really messes with me.
That's completely understandable. And I think that you're right that all four of those scenarios that you were talking about are going on all at the same time. The cultural context, and especially the literary context, is super necessary to get 100% out of this text, and I don't even have that. Before we get into the text in earnest, I am going to list off a few literary references that I pick up and what they mean and what you can sort of substitute or plug in for whenever you're reading or listening these references for, so that it makes a little more sense. But, even then there's just so much going on, and that will sort of help you get past these layers of literary illusion and really complicated language so that you can start to piece together maybe what's being talked about here in a concrete way. So anytime you see 8 or 16-foot golden body, we're talking about the body of a Buddha here, the body of a bodhisattva or a fully developed Buddha. Whenever you see 2 or 3 bushels, so X, Y, or Z is 2 or 3 bushels, he's referencing Buddha nature. And you can look back to the Koan series for more on that. Whenever you see 7 or 8 feet, he's talking about the Buddha himself. Whenever you see Dogen mention walls, tiles, and pebbles, he's talking about the different ways of seeing the granularity of small d dharmas. If you see it in a very zoomed out way, it's walls. Zoom in a little more in your examination, it's tiles. Zoom in a little more in your examination, it's pebbles. Whenever we see splattered with mud and soaking wet, we're talking about the sort of Dharma realization that's in the essence of everything. So negative experiences can contain an essence of awakening or of enlightenment. Whenever he says the gateless gate, he's referring to the title of the classic Gateless Gate koan collection, but also to the idea of the path of Buddhahood, which is a gate which has no gate. It doesn't cut anybody off or separate anybody or exclude anybody, but it is a portal which you go through. There are some that I don't really know that much about, like cutting off the arm, attaining the marrow. That one I can't really make heads or tails of. He has one, painting a decayed tree. That's talking about delusion and building up conceptions about reality based on that delusion. And then the last one I'll mention before we go in is polishing a brick of ash. Whenever he says this, he's referring to practice, because the idea is that if you do this enough, you can take something dead and granular and not solid and polish it and work with it and stick with it for a long time and turn it into a very solid brick or even a gemstone, right? This is sort of alluding to how, diamonds form in the rough. So it's referring to the practice of sudden, complete enlightenment.
I think it would be referencing against that, since you're polishing this brick for a while, ?
Well, the idea is that it's going to be ash and it's going to be, it's going to be rough instead of being a diamond for the majority of time that you have it, right? I mean, if you pick up a handful of ash, and especially if you don't have like some kind of binding agent, then it's just going to be like a handful of dirt, basically, or a handful of dust for a very long time. But if you stick with it and do it for a very, very long time, eventually it'll get solid. And then their idea still is that even though it becomes solid and cohesive, it's still not a diamond yet. It's still just like a brick of ash. And then after polishing it, eventually all at once, you'll realize sort of that you're polishing a diamond instead of ash.
Okay.
Dogen is notoriously weird and flippy-floppy about the sudden versus gradual enlightenment idea, but in some of these passages, we can see this reference used to indicate sudden enlightenment, and in other times gradual. So it's, it can go both ways, but it's been generally interpreted in scholarly consensus to be a sudden enlightenment reference based on the way that his disciples and others outside of this conversation have used it.
Okay.
And again, translation is always interpretation. And so there could be a case where the translator, who is a Zen person, by the way, a Zen Buddhist practitioner, they could have interpreted it in such a way that is not necessarily wrong, but might have some different meanings from the original text. I'm not going to accuse them of that because that's, I don't have anything to stand on whenever I do so, but I just think that it's high chance.
And also, it is just an inevitable part of translation.
It is.
Even if that's what they did, there's no way around it. Like, that's how it has to happen.
Exactly, yeah. And that you were saying about how there's concepts here that don't translate at all, that's 100% true as well. And, a lot of scholarly translators will lean towards leaving those things untranslated because they know their audience is going to have a little bit of context in that regard and at least know, like you say, what's being gestured at. But this was kind of translated for a less academic audience who wanted to do Buddhism, wanted to learn about Buddhism, and wanted to access the classics in a non-scholarly kind of way, which is perfectly fine and good and gives us more interesting stuff to talk about. So it's really not a problem. One thing that I'm sure that, I'm not sure, I'm fairly sure wasn't happening is whenever you were mentioning that Dogen was trying to impress readers with his wisdom and wordplay. I think that there is an element of demonstrating that you have a command of language skillfully, because we've talked about skillful means and stuff like that. But I want to say that Dogen was most likely wanting readers or listeners to come away and have their brains scrambled more than for them to be impressed and to like him a lot. I think that they wanted people to come away from these texts and really be as confused as I was the first time and as perhaps you are this time reading this or listening to this in a lecture form. So I think that there is definitely the necessity for like wisdom and wordplay, but there's times where some people read this and they think, oh, Dogen's showing off. And they point to certain things that he does, especially when they read the Japanese. They think that Dogen is like just showing off how good at this he is. And sometimes I just think that someone doing something they're really good at is not them showing off on face value. And I know you're not saying that he's showing off in like a selfish or like a braggadocious way, but that's something that's out there among scholars who read this. And I just wanted to sort of take my stance on it. I don't think that he's sort of showing off. I think that he's doing something deliberate and doing something on purpose to try and mess with us. And I think that if we come away, with that anxiety or that concern that he has been trying to play with us and show off to us, then it's been successful. And then, like you say, the last situation, these texts are not meant to be examined rationally. They definitely aren't. And they're not meant to be examined structurally either. There is no coherent 5-paragraph essay structure or any sort of structure that we can look to as a means of unpacking meaning.
Yeah.
We can unpack meaning in a variety of ways, but we can't look for a thesis statement or an argumentative sort of structure to find anything. And, for that reason, it kind of seems like ramblings. But, one thing to remember too is that this is compiled.
Right.
So it wasn't written down front to back all in one go. It's almost like these 3 different sections that we're discussing were 5 different lectures or 3 different lectures on a specific topic that happened at different times or were written down at different times. And they were put together not because they all align with a certain theme or idea, but because they were all sayings or writings of Dogen. So that's sort of the connecting thread through all of this, is that they were part of his preaching or part of his writing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for one, someone doing something skillfully is often indistinguishable from somebody showing off. If you are doing something well, then doing that in front of people is going to be the same thing as showing off, visually. The distinction is in Dogen's head, and I have no access to that, so I don't want to investigate those motivations much further, just because it's a little unfair. Like, he's not here to defend himself from those accusations. And, when I'm writing, I use wordplay as well, and I know from a couple of negative interactions that people view that as showing off. So, this is also something that I do as well. So, that part is outside of the discussion. But another big thing that I was not thinking of when I read it, and that you just clarified, the fact that these are a compilation and all put together does significantly reframe how it would have been originally engaged with. So, again, I am not engaging with this in the way that it was originally intended, and that definitely colors my opinion of what was going on.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, and I'm with you there. And I tend to approach texts that I read as the speaker or the writer believing the things that they are saying. And so in that way, not trying to convince or dupe or to bait and switch the listener or the reader in any way, but trying to develop the idea that they want to develop. And so, whenever being critical of a text or critical of an idea, you're always being critical of the text or the idea, never the person, right? And I think that that's where you've landed, and that's where I want all the listeners to land with it as well.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, on to get into the individual readings?
Yeah, so let's start with Genjo Koan, Actualizing the Fundamental Point.
So, I note that less than a page into this reading, we already see something that contradicts what we've discussed in previous episodes. We've said that enlightened beings know they are enlightened, but near the beginning of this passage, Dogen claims that enlightened people do not necessarily notice that they're enlightened. So, we've talked about, forgetful bodhisattvas who forget some aspect of their enlightenment for the purpose of demonstrating to unenlightened people. It's a skillful means sort of deal. So we're not completely in unprecedented territory, but also we kind of are. So let's talk about this a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. So for Zen in particular, the Lotus Sutra, where we get this idea of the forgetful bodhisattva as a skillful means, it was very important and very transformative. And really, Zen or Chan, prior to the foundation of Soto Zen and Renzai Zen in Japan, they had not really engaged with this in this kind of way that Dogen is. And the reason for that is eventually the answer I'm going to give for you is going to be original enlightenment. So what's going on here is when he claims less than a page in that you can forget enlightenment or you can be enlightened and not know it, he's speaking to the fact that there are some kinds of realization or some levels of enlightenment that don't stick very well if you don't maintain practice. So I mentioned in the intro that the sort of guiding question behind Dogen's whole practice, his whole sort of work as a Buddhist monk, starting with his engagement with Tendai, where he got a lot of examples and a lot of experience with the Lotus Sutra, his question has always been, quote, "As I study both the exoteric and the esoteric schools of Buddhism, they maintain that human beings are endowed with Dharma nature by birth. If this is the case, why did the Buddhas of all ages, undoubtedly in possession of enlightenment, find it necessary to seek enlightenment and engage in spiritual practice?" Unquote. So the question is, he's been taught Buddha nature. He's been taught that everybody has a Buddha seed or a Buddha womb in them, the Tathagata Garbha. And if this is there, and if that's fundamental to being a sentient being, then why do we have to do all of this work? Why do Buddhas themselves have to do all of this work? And what he finds is that the work is itself enlightenment. If you don't do the work, then you lose it. You eventually fall back into delusion, attachment, desire, dukkha, all of that stuff.
Makes sense.
Exactly, yeah. And the attachment, the desire, the delusion is not time specific. So one aspect we haven't really talked about with original enlightenment or with Buddha nature is that none of it is attached to the conventional linear time, past, present, future system that we all conventionally think in. So thinking that we have original enlightenment or that we have forgotten our enlightenment and now have fallen into attachment and desire and delusion doesn't mean that we were in the past before now enlightened and have lost it. It could mean that we need to clear off this dukkha, this delusion, this attachment and desire in order to get to it in the future. Or it could mean instead of going forwards or backwards in time, we're going up or down. Or it could mean all of these at the same time. And that's sort of what he's doing here, especially in the next passage, which will be Uji, being time. He's trying to give you sort of a more mandalic or time as a flat circle interpretation of the timeline of original enlightenment. It's not before or in the future. It's under, it's on top, it's relative in that way. It's sort of wherever it is and nowhere else. And so the idea is essentially, Buddhas be Buddhas. That's what they do, and that's why they do what they do. That's kind of the only way to explain it. They have to work because the work is itself Buddhahood.
Right. So what we were talking about with time also flows into what I wanted to talk about in paragraphs. They're labeled 3 to 7 in our book. For listeners, the paragraph I'm talking about begins with, quote, "When you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you grasp things directly," unquote. And we're talking about a few paragraphs from there. If I were to read my modern context back into this, which is a mistake, don't do that necessarily, but in this case, I think it makes for an interesting discussion. It's kind of reminding me of certain physics theories of time-space that claim we perceive time as progressing from past to future from our perspective, but on a fundamental level, time behaves the same as space. So all time is really more of a single thing than what we're talking about. It mixes things together, and we only perceive time the way we do because our senses are limited. So it's interesting to see a similar idea coming from a spiritual place rather than one of physics and time-space.
I agree, yeah. And I'm always fascinated by this mandalic time in Buddhist texts where I find it, because you always find the most confusing and trippy texts that are talking about this. This is always like the hardest thing to wrap one's head around, because we're so locked into a linear 24-hour time that breaking it or reframing it, either through studying physics or through studying these texts, is just super difficult. And having this mandalic view of time, or otherwise expounding on it and making particular arguments about it, is very common, very, very common in Dogen's time. All of the Kamakura Buddhist reform schools, so that would be both schools of Zen, Soto Zen and Rinzai Zen, that would be both forms of Pure Land Buddhism, Jodo Shu, regular Pure Land, and Jodo Shinshu, true Pure Land, and Nichiren Buddhism. They all have passages, or they have even entire fascicles of texts that are talking about how time works in their particular system, in their particular version of whatever kind of Buddhism that they are advocating for and what they're founding and what they're writing about. And they're all slightly different and they function in slightly different ways, but they all make references to some of the same texts, and it's really fantastic and interesting to read.
Yeah. This part of the reading was actually getting to me pretty well. Things start to fall apart after this for me, but those lines was like, oh, cool, I see what you're getting at, and it's interesting, yeah. So next I wanted to talk about it's labeled paragraph 8 in our reading. It's talking about enlightenment and the moon being reflected on water, and it's kind of a restatement of Indra's net, talking about how the moon affects the water affects the moon, the reflections and the properties of that. It's really interesting. And it's also another part where you can kind of read modern context back into this by going like, oh, the moon affects water because the moon is part of what causes tides.
Absolutely, yeah. And they knew this back at that time period as well.
Oh,
and
cool.
That's part of what this sort of metaphor is based on, is that the moon has significant influence over the water. So if you think of the moon as Dharma nature or Buddha nature or Buddhahood itself, and you think of all of us as water, or if you look to the Indra's net situation, think of us as jewels, then yeah, I mean, you're right on the money. That's sort of how this is the absolutely most zoomed out large scale picture of what Dogen is trying to say, encapsulated in this one paragraph, is that enlightenment is reflected by all of us, and how enlightenment moves us toward itself, or moves us, in an enlightening way. And to allow ourselves to reflect clearly and to allow ourselves to be moved by it is how we continue to do the work of enlightenment. From this, all other things that he says in the rest of the entire Shōbōgenzō can flow, if you interpret it through this lens. And this also speaks specifically to the fact that he's turning enlightenment into a verb rather than a noun with his arguments and his assertions about what it means.
Yeah, enlightenment is about what you do. That makes a lot of sense. And it does jive with stuff that we've talked about in the past. So I will say the Genjo Koan section actually worked pretty well for me. It's when we started getting into the other two readings that I kind of fell out with what Dogen was trying to say.
And those ones get much more difficult.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. This is a good starting point for Dogen, I think. And from there, it just ramps up in difficulty significantly. One more passage from the Genjo Koan I wanted to talk about. In our reading, it is labeled paragraph 11. The text begins, quote, "Now, if a bird or a fish tries to reach the end of its enlightenment before moving in it, this bird or this fish will not find its way or its place." So this paragraph and the passages going after seems like you could boil down what he's saying to, you have to know where you are before you start moving if you actually want to get to your destination.
That's absolutely true. And the meaning under all of that is dealing with his sort of argument of like, you need to work and do things in enlightenment. Like, that's sort of what it's all about. Enlightenment is a continuous work, a continuous ongoing action. But you have to know the nature of your enlightenment, and you have to know Buddha nature and Buddhahood top to bottom in order to be able to navigate in it. Right? I mean, he's kind of saying, if you don't know that you are in water, then swimming or attempting to swim is a fool's errand. You're not going to get anywhere. And you're going to sink, or you're going to fail in some way. But what we have on our side, if we take this analogy or this metaphor further, is we are fish. So a fish attempting to swim is at least mostly going to be the right thing, the right kind of thing to move at one point, just because of its nature. And what he's arguing is we have Buddha nature, so our moves are going to be mostly right if we hold all other things as being equal and we just do it. We're going to be mostly right. But the thing is, if we conceive of enlightenment as a path with enlightenment as the goal, or with enlightenment as the path itself, one or the other as two extreme ends of a spectrum, and we operate according to, believing one of those two ways, either way, if we start trying to pursue it, it's not going to work. It's going to be like we have it tied to a string hung in front of our heads, right? We're going to keep going forward, but it's going to keep going forward, and we're not going to get any closer. So you have to stop thinking of it as a linear, from here to there path, with that as a goal or with that as the footsteps. It's kind of both. Here he's kind of breaking down the distinction of the idea of path and goal, of path and result of path. So in this, he's sort of critiquing other practitioners and critiquing other ways of practicing Buddhism. He's saying like, yeah, your moves are mostly right because you're fish in water, but you don't know that you're in water, and you don't know that, fish have a specific nature in relation to water, and therefore you're not actually getting anywhere. So you have to think of it in this way instead. And so it's kind of another restatement of, for example, his answer to the question of like, why do Buddhas do work to seek enlightenment? Why does anybody have to work spiritually? And it also speaks to that paragraph 8 that we were talking about, which is sort of a reinterpretation of Indra's net. It combines those two in like metaphor form and explains them as a way of practice and as a way of saying other people are doing things differently and they're doing them wrong.
So a bit of hidden interdenominational sniping, there it goes. But that's nothing new for these kinds of texts, so let's move on with that. You got a lot more out of this than I did, and hearing your extra interpretation of it gives me a bit more to think about. I might go back and reread the passage again after we're done recording.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you kind of opened up an extra layer for me.
Good. I'm glad. And before we move to Uji, being time, I wanted to call attention to paragraph 13, which is the closing paragraph, which is a koan unto itself. So sometimes Zen practitioners in Soto will be given this koan to think about and to come up with like a ritualized dialogue about. Zen Master Baocha of Mount Mayu was fanning himself. A monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of wind is permanent, and there is no place it doesn't reach. Why then do you fan yourself?" Baocha said, "Although you understand that the nature of the wind is permanent, you don't understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere." "What is the meaning of its reaching everywhere?" asked the monk again, and the master just kept fanning himself. And the monk bowed deeply. So this is the answer to Dogen's question, right? Buddha nature is permanent. Buddha nature is everywhere. So why are you still practicing enlightenment? And Baocha says, you're right that it's permanent. You're right that it's everywhere, but you don't understand its being everywhere and what that actually means. Even though the wind is everywhere, you still have to keep fanning yourself. And this is saying you have to continue what has been translated here as practice enlightenment, as a hyphenated single word, right? So this doesn't have any singular answer as easy as just, oh yeah, you just have to keep working. But that's sort of the central theme of the koan, is speaking to an important Soto distinction, which is enlightenment is a verb and it is ongoing forever.
Right. And even if it reaches everywhere, you have to put in some kind of effort, i.e. continue fanning yourself, in order for it to do what you want it to do.
Exactly.
Anything else for Genjo Koan?
Nope, now we can move on to Uji, the time being.
So, at first it seemed like this text was pointing to a few things I could follow. Things like how time affects and connects everything, and that it's not as linear as we generally perceive it, as we had just discussed. But there's a lot more details that get layered onto these ideas, and I start to lose the point. It reads as too much icing, not enough cake. I also suspect this passage has a whole lot of linguistic flourishes that don't translate to English. So, this is where I started to lose the plot, and I'm not sure what to think of this one.
Yeah, I totally understand. Yeah, and this one is, like we've been saying, it's where it gets really hard. So I'll give my quick summary, and then I will find some lines that we can sort of discuss as it sort of pertains to the summary or my interpretation And acknowledging, of course, there are far more interpretations than just mine out there. This is just sort of where I land with this text, having read it a few times in the English and in the original Japanese. So my interpretation is that the time being is actually not a great translation for the title. The title in Japanese is uji, and the first character u, or yu, is referring to something existing. And the second character ji is what we commonly use to say time, or to say the hour. So my prior Aikido teachers who have read this and who have used this in their research, I, for example, have a prior teacher in Aikido who was a philosophy PhD, and he was talking about the experience, the body-mind experience in Japanese Buddhism for his dissertation, and he uses this text, and he doesn't translate it as the time being. He translates the fascicle as being o'clock.
I see.
And the reason why is because in modern Japanese, if you want to say it's 3 o'clock, then you say sanji, 3 and then hour. So uji is not 3 o'clock, it's being o'clock. So it's kind of an interesting, funny way to say it.
I do think that translation better serves the text better, because taking my current understanding of it and applying that translation, I think would have been a clearer and easier read.
I think so, yeah. And so you remember you were saying about the theory of time-space, that time functions and exists the exact same way that space does. So it's not a linear stream with a sequence of A and then B and then C. Rather, it's an infinitely expansive, an infinite collection of streams that all, expand from one point, or they just expand even if there isn't a central point, right? It just sort of, it's mandalic. It's a flat circle. It goes in all directions. It's not actually the exact same as a thread with notches along each point at periodical distances. That's exactly what's being argued here. Being is time and time is being. The first sentence says, uji here means time itself is being and all being is time. Whenever we look at reality from an esoteric Buddhist point of view, we argue that it is the entire Dharma presenting itself because it's part of the Dharmakaya of Vairocana. And it's presenting itself for Vairocana's own delight and his own joy, but it's also presenting itself because it is leading sentient beings to Buddhahood, to enlightenment. There is a little bit of esoteric going on in here, in Zen, especially in Dogen's version of Zen as well. He doesn't agree that the entirety of reality is all Vairocana's body. He doesn't agree that that's the concrete nature of the reality we live in. He doesn't think that we are all words in the Dharma world text that we've talked about before. But he does believe that reality is always an outflow of the Dharma, whether there's good stuff or bad stuff happening. And this outflow is temporal in the sense that it has causal sequences, it has causal relationships between different points of it, in the sense of, for example, dependent origination, right? Especially in Japanese Buddhism, because of the influence of Shingon, actually, there's this thought process that, all these different Buddhas emphasize different aspects of the Dharma. And so, for example, Amida emphasizes compassion because he invites all sentient beings into his Pure Land. And Vairocana is sort of the universe. He's like the cosmic Buddha. The nature of the Buddha as being universal or cosmic. Shakyamuni, who is the primary Buddha of worship in Zen Buddhism, is known for being the Buddha of dependent origination. So he's reached enlightenment and preached about it because he has sort of penetrated the truth of dependent origination, and that's sort of his window. And taking in dependent origination as an interpretive lens to this text, you start to see that Dogen is kind of approaching dependent origination from the other side. And when I say from the other side, I mean not from the structural arguments and the metaphysical arguments posed in the Pali Canon, where we get dependent origination from to begin with. He's approaching it from the side of somebody just sitting in it and experiencing it. And at the same time, he's also coming at it from the idea that all of dependent origination is still didactic or is still educational. It's still deliberate and leads to realization if examined. And so if you're sitting in the room where, all of the Dharma is projecting itself to you, then you start to see, yes, you can get through it and see dependent origination. But what's important is that you are seeing all of the world around you as explaining itself to you, as sort of demonstrating its suchness to you. And part of suchness is a temporal nature. Part of suchness is being, this which comes before and which becomes after something else. There's the 10 suchnesses in the Lotus Sutra, and I don't remember them all right now, but one of them is something's causative nature, its causative suchness. And then the other two are the nature of it coming before and coming after something. So this is explaining how to access all of the Dharma by thinking about about reality as explaining itself and as explaining time. And then again, as time explaining being. So we have that first line where he makes that argument. And then for the rest of the fascicle, he develops that idea. So in paragraph 4, we have, quote, "Know that in this way there are myriads of forms and hundreds of grasses throughout the entire earth, and yet each grass and each form itself is the entire earth. The study of this is the beginning of practice. When you are at this place, there is just one grass, there is just one form. There is understanding of form and no understanding." He goes on to say, "Each moment is all being, is the entire world." Unquote. This is speaking to perhaps that Ichinen Sanzen concept that we discussed in Nichiren Buddhism, where the entirety of reality is captured in one small particle of it. And this is how we unpack the relationship between time and existence. So again, it's hard. It's hard to explain. It's hard to sort of come together and make sense of. But it's very sort of poetically and sort of literarily explaining the experience of knowing that reality is explaining itself. Reality is captured in a fractalic nature, in the sense that if you look at one small grain of sand, then you'll see all sand in all beaches and all rivers everywhere. And seeing that all of the world is captured in one single moment, one single instant, one single small thing, or all the same at the one time, right? So we've talked about how something like a small d dharma is a window through which you can understand all other dharmas, and then thus the capital D dharma. He's also saying one single moment is a window, one single encounter is a window as well. And from that, you can understand all of the capital D dharma. And whenever you encounter a small d dharma, a thing in reality, that itself is being, it's a being, but it's also a moment in time. And it's both of those things together that make it enlightening. It's both of those things together that make it an experience of the Dharma explaining itself to us.
Okay. With it explained, I can kind of see it. I would need to go back and reread the whole thing to integrate the context you just gave to really evaluate this well. But this is a spot where the text did not convey what you were just talking about to me as I read it. And that could be an issue with the text, that could be an issue with the translator, that could be an issue with me. It's probably the latter. But yeah, it's just the way the language of this passage worked for me was just really tiring, and it felt like I was getting a minimal amount of meaning from it. And part of that might be that I've already been exposed to some of these ideas. So, for example, the idea of reality preaching the Dharma to us is something that we've encountered before and is not new to me. So it didn't seem that particularly profound when I was reading about it, because it's like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. You're putting a different spin on it, but I see the trick you're going with. It's the same trick we've seen before, and this is just your version of it. And I just didn't like that version as well as previous ones.
Yeah, and it's hard because this is hard to say. Like, it took me a while to like really get it out and to really explain it, you know, and it was, of course, I'm talking off the cuff, but it's really hard to communicate in language what's going on here. And even Zen acknowledges that there's some stuff that is beyond language and can only be sort of transmitted mind to mind, right? Mind to mind transmission of the Dharma is a whole thing. And I'm not saying that Dogen wrote this and that it was hard and potentially even kind of bad for us reading it because he was struggling against something ineffable. I think it was just hard and bad for us because he was communicating something that you really have to experience to fully understand. And it also has to be in your own time and your own way, right? Like he acknowledges this, but the fact is we're not going to get it just by reading this passage. We're going to know that there's something out there to get, maybe, and we're going to know how to interpret it, and we're going to know, you know, what it means, but we have to go and experience the thing ourselves in some way in order for any of this to have any meaning.
Yeah, it's just a limitation of language and the fact that experience is often a stronger teacher than text.
Yeah.
Anything else to talk about in Uji?
Nope. We can move on to Shinjin Gakudo, Body and Mind Study of the Way.
So, Section 2, Shinjin Gakudo, begins with, quote, "For the time being, let us say that there are two approaches to studying the Buddha way, to study with mind and to study with body," unquote. So that's the section we're talking about. That actually segues perfectly into what we were just talking about. Studying with the mind, I would guess, is reading about it and thinking about it, whereas to study with the body is to go out and do it, or perhaps to go out and practice the esoteric side of things that just you cannot convey with language.
Absolutely, yeah. At the end of this text, he does kind of break down that body and mind distinction in some ways, but he is sort of speaking to this idea that in the 10 precepts, for example, there are actions of the mind and actions of the body, which are morally relevant, right? So in the 10 precepts, we have don't be violent, don't steal, and don't lie. Those are acts of the body, right? And then we have acts of the mind, don't hold wrong views, don't be jealous, don't get angry, don't be greedy, that stuff. Those are actions of the mind. And so he's acknowledging a distinction that's out there that he's going to complicate with this text.
And he complicates that by talking about different types of mind. So the aspects of the mind include consciousness, emotion, and intellect. Then he talks about straightforward mind, the mind of the ancient Buddhas, everyday mind, the triple world, which is one mind. So to study with the mind could mean a dozen different things depending on which mind is doing the studying.
Yeah, and how you are using that mind. Something that I want to point to just because it exists and it's important. There is a school of Buddhism in America called Everyday Mind Buddhism, or Normal Mind Zen Buddhism, or something along those lines. And it looks to paragraph 8 of this section as being very important, right? This is sort of their central, I don't want to say it's their central text because it's not a whole text unto itself, but it's a very central part of a very central text for them. They exist, they're out there. This is where they get that from, is Everyday Mind as a reference of Dogen's paragraph here. These different kinds of mind that he talks about, they all have these different definitions or these different aspects or characteristics, right? And like you were talking about, everyday mind is to maintain an everyday mind in this world or in any world, to quote him. It's just sort of how we go about every day. Bits and pieces of straightforward mind, on the other hand, is the collection of all of these sort of small little ideas or the small little feelings that we have that are enlightening or are of a Dharma nature, the things that push us forward, right? Bits and pieces of a straightforward mind is also a literary reference. I don't really know specifically what it's referring to and what you could like plug in whenever you're reading that, but that's also a reference there. One very important kind of mind that comes up again is the mind that has aroused the desire for enlightenment. In Japanese, it's called Bodai-shin. Bodai meaning like bodhisattva and shin meaning mind. He has this paragraph in section 5 that says, the thought of enlightenment can occur within birth and death, within nirvana. It can also occur without concern for birth and death and nirvana. It also does not depend upon the place where it occurs, nor is it hindered by the place where it occurs. Conditions don't arouse it. Knowledge doesn't arouse it. The thought of enlightenment arouses itself. That's a very important part of this section. He's arguing that Bodai-shin is not something that you choose to do. It's not something that you can exert upon the world around you or exert upon yourself. The thought of enlightenment arises itself. This is because all of the world is capital D Dharma. All reality, including us, is capital D Dharma expressing itself in Uji. Therefore, whenever the thought of enlightenment arouses itself, the desire for enlightenment arouses itself, the bodhicitta arouses itself, it's not a person doing so because a person doesn't exist. It's the Dharma, the universe sort of making a pact to know itself top to bottom and become omniscient and become compassionate and become everything that a Buddha is. So that's a very important aspect to take away from this, is that he thinks that Bodai-shin is something that arouses itself of itself by itself, rather than any of us having anything to do with it.
It seems to me like the desire to reach enlightenment starts with noticing that the world is dissatisfying, like noticing the reality of dukkha. And that is something that people can do without Buddhist teaching going for it. Like, we can look at the world and see, oh, there's a lot of problems here. There are things that are dissatisfying here, and I would like to change that. And that is the start of the desire for enlightenment and the desire for people to help people out of the dissatisfying nature of this world. So it's a spark that can light itself just by a mind observing the world and thinking that there's got to be something better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, anybody who has ever suffered in any way has been in a situation where the mind that seeks enlightenment could have aroused itself, or did arouse itself, right? I mean, that applies to anybody who has experienced any kind of suffering. And I mean suffering. I don't just mean dukkha here. I mean suffering. According to the Buddhist doctrine, especially according to Dogen, any being who experiences dukkha, in that person, the thought of enlightenment can arouse itself. The conditions are there, right? The conditions are met. And it's not even a condition because it's not temporary. Dukkha is not temporary. It's not impermanent. Dukkha is a reality. It's something that exists. So in that sense, it's not even like a condition that has to be met, because he says conditions don't arouse the thought of enlightenment and knowledge doesn't arouse it. It's just the reality of a world pervaded by dukkha, the reality of a world in which dukkha, desire, suffering, ignorance all exist. So it definitely makes sense here. This is something that makes it even more universal than any other presentation of bodhicitta in different texts makes it. Because there's other kinds of Buddhism where it's not this universal, where you have to say something, you have to think something, you have to do something, you have to practice something in order to actually arouse this desire. And the reason why they have all these standards and these conditions of knowledge and these causal conditions and stuff is because they think that if you don't really build up the structure enough, then the thought of enlightenment won't stick and you won't, stay with it and continue to practice. They think that if your karma is too bad, then it'll weigh you down and that'll stop you from, attaining enlightenment in a timely fashion or something like that. But the idea that Dogen's trying to get across is that this can arouse itself in anyone, and it's not conditional and it's not required of knowledge. In fact, knowledge sometimes and conditions can sometimes hinder it. And it also is not something that does or does not stick. The thought of enlightenment sticks. And it's just whether or not the thought of enlightenment is something that we follow or not. right? Thought of enlightenment, once it arouses itself, is always there until we reach Buddhahood or enlightenment. But like he says earlier in Genjo Koan, we can lose our relationship to the capital D Dharma by means of sort of lacking in our work, right? By sort of becoming, too complacent and not doing the work of enlightenment.
Makes sense. It's also worth pointing out that this passage has a lot of the cultural references we were talking about before that just, I don't understand what's happening. Like, attain my marrow, pound rice and receive the robe, donkey hoof. Like, this semantically just does not parse. I do not see a meaning for what this is trying to get to. And that's just a cultural reference I don't have.
Yeah, so it might be good to double what I'm about to say earlier in our discussion and now. So we're reading the collection of sayings of Dogen in a compilation called The Moon in a Dewdrop. And that's a reference to the famous image or the famous metaphor for enlightenment or for Buddha nature in the world is the moon reflected in a dewdrop. Something as large and as powerful as the moon captured in something as small and temporary as a dewdrop. And then similarly also the relationship between, the water and the moon itself. And in this text, the translator and the author and compiler have put asterisks next to some of these references that might not parse for us. So there's sometimes stars or asterisks that you can go look and see a note that they've written about it and make some more sense of it on another read through. But sometimes, sometimes it's not as easy as what I was saying in the beginning, where you can substitute 2 or 3 bushels as Buddha nature or something like that, right? It's not always as simple and straightforward. So just keep that in mind, listeners and readers, if you go back to this text and try and parse all that out. This book alone will not have all the answers for that stuff. And that just speaks to how, Dogen and this text, the Shōbōgenzō, they're so deeply layered with literary allusions and different meanings and different references to stuff that we're not part of that conversation. We're not part of that language group. And when I say language group, I don't just mean the Japanese. I mean we're not part of that language group as in we don't use those same expressions and figures of speech to refer to the same things that he does. And so it's just lost on us, right? We don't have that stuff. So if you choose to go and pursue and find all that stuff, more power to you, because it's very, very hard. Very, very hard. It requires a lot of reading, a lot of hard texts, and a lot of different texts from different genres, right? I mean, some of these references point to stuff that aren't even what we would call Buddhist literature. It's references to famous poems. It's references to court poems and imperial poems. It's references to even popular literature that doesn't exist anymore, that we can't access because we can't read it, we can't find it, we don't know what it says or what it is. It's very complicated in that way.
Yep. So last thing I wanted to talk about from this section is starting at what is labeled paragraph 11 and beyond. We've talked about interdenominational sniping, but it seems like what's going on here is a few instances of just straightforward criticism. This is not sniping. This is saying, do not follow the mistaken views of spontaneous or natural enlightenment. Do not get caught up in discussions of delusion or enlightenment, good or bad. Do not stay in the realm of wrong or right, true or false. That is not sniping because he's just saying it. And that I actually can respect a bit more than the sniping in my head. The sniping often feels petty and mean-spirited, whereas this is just hey, this is where we disagree. I think you should do it this way. And I can respect that.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes when he's talking about this stuff, sometimes he's talking to other Buddhist sects, but he's also talking to his own practitioners, because the spontaneous or the gradual enlightenment, the sudden or gradual enlightenment, this is a conversation that really only exists in Zen Buddhism. It doesn't exist anywhere else. And so, I mentioned earlier that Dogen is wishy-washy on sudden or gradual enlightenment. Sometimes he says it's one, sometimes he says it's the other. Now he says it's neither. He goes back and forth. And this is something that practitioners and scholars alike seem to have to struggle with whenever they approach him and his texts and the things that he's said and written. And so he's speaking to his own practitioners like,
don't get too caught up in this.
Yeah, don't get too caught up in one extreme or the other. And he's also speaking to a very Mahayana thing, which is don't get caught up in moral structures and moral black and whites of good and bad, because that's not productive. That's all just like he says, it's like a fish trying to swim and get to the end of its enlightenment without knowing that it's in the enlightenment water. You know what I mean? You're spinning your wheels, you're wasting your time, and it's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, that's something that I have a whole lot of here today in my life now, and there is no reason to expect that it was any different back then. So yeah, I see where he's coming from here, and I agree with him, at least in the fact that there are more important things to spend one's mental cycles on.
Yeah, and it's a Zen thing to sort of think about, this is what I think that the cutting off the arm, reaching the marrow thing refers to, is I think that he's talking about like discard all of the extra nonsense, such as sudden or gradual enlightenment, such as moral good or moral bad, such as, this or that, and get to the really important stuff, the marrow of the practice of enlightenment. And in that way, he's really playing into the original enlightenment or to the universal Buddha nature of Zen Buddhism by saying, you're worrying about all this extra stuff, but you can be a Buddha right now. You just have to do it. Just like stop thinking about it, stop trying all this stuff, stop worrying about all this extra stuff, just do it. And I respect that a lot here.
Any pieces that you want to talk about that I missed?
In Shinjin Gakudo, let's see. The last thing I want to say about the whole Shōbōgenzō and all of the passages we've read and the entire sort of compilation of text that it exists within, the last thing I'll say is that all of that has been thought of or interpreted by scholars and practitioners alike as being a large singular koan from front to back. And that can speak to the structural confusion that we have, and also to the density and the issue of, not really getting what he's saying, right? You mentioned like it's not meant to be examined rationally. And if we interpret it as being a koan, then that's 100% true. And so thinking of it as a koan, koans are usually very short, small snippets. They're like no more than a paragraph long. The Shōbōgenzō, at least translated into English, is 4 1,000-page volumes, right? So, imagine a koan that is that long. It's insane. That's so long for something that, to sit on it, to consider it, to understand it, to internalize it, to actualize it, to break through it. That takes, lifetimes of work. And so if you ever are listening to this episode and you go back and you read this text, then see what you think and see what comes out if you read it as being like a koan from front to back and understanding what that interpretation really gives you from this text. I have not really been good at that in my use of this text because I'm always much more interested in the scholarly aspect and the translation aspect and the philosophy aspect. But nonetheless, there is definitely something there for people who look at this and they don't try to break it down, categorize it. They don't try to sort of figure it out in a discriminatory this and not that kind of way. They don't try to use academic or linguistic methods to go after it. They actually sort of just let it wash over them and then they break through it with their practice. That's interesting. That's a really fascinating way to approach any text, but in particular this one. And so, definitely see what happens if you try that.
I could see that. I think it would probably be more digestible to regard each different section as a separate koan on its own. Like, we're talking 4,000 pages to be chewing on and focusing on the way that you're supposed to do with a koan, and that is more than I think the human mind is able to do, just physically keeping that much information in. But I could see that happening from section to section, one at a time, drilling on them. But also, I'm here rationalizing about how to do a koan. I have already failed the assignment. So, yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. It's not going to be a way I look at it just because my mind really dislikes that kind of operation. I would get bored of it very quickly. But for folks who can do that, I would be interested in hearing how they respond.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially there's sections in this that are actual instructions. They say the way to do Zazen meditation is to do X, Y, and Z. You find a comfortable room, and then you sit on a cushion, and you cross your legs in this particular way, and you posture your back in this particular way, and you do X, Y, and Z with your mind. And how to think of concrete instructions where he's sort of commanding or ordering you to do something in a specific sequence, how to look at that as a koan would be really fascinating for me. I don't really know how you would do that. So if someone has done that, please let me know.
Anything else we want to put on the recording?
I'm all good.
All right. Well, that was a meaty episode. So makes sense because there's a whole lot to say about this relatively short section of reading. So I think we have reached a good point to call it done. So thank you all for listening, and I hope everybody had something interesting to think about after this.
Yes, thank you for listening to our discussion of passages from Dogen's Shōbōgenzō, collected in The Moon and a Dewdrop, translated by Kazuaki Tanahashi. We'll see you next time.
If you like our show and want to support us financially, we ask that you send that generosity to people in need. For now, we recommend you support World Central Kitchen, an organization that works to feed communities in times of crisis. Right now, they are active in many areas, supporting people in the path of wildfires in America, in the wake of the earthquake in Afghanistan, Ukrainians fighting off foreign occupiers, and relieving the weaponized famine happening in Gaza. If you have the means, please join us in supporting their good work.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and the voice of Hearer.
And I'm Dox, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have any questions that you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment, review, or subscribing. You can also reach us by email at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.